So welcome everyone, welcome to today's Spark Your Health Talk, 108 awesome yoga poses for kids with Yogi Beans founder, Lauren Chaitoff. My name is Katera Noviello-Kapoor and I am the Senior Director of Health Promotion, Wellness and Athletics with the 92nd Street Y. And this evening, this has just thrown me off. We look forward to taking a look at how to realistically go about weaving a yoga practice in your child's or students' lives and why it is a positive activity for children to be introduced to. We hope, of course, you will also be able to join us for upcoming Spark Your Health events. We have a lot coming up this fall. We have a virtual and in-person yoga and writing workshop with Jennifer Lang, and then Iyengar Yoga and Mindfulness Tune-Up with Michael Morphus, who's joining us all the way from Croatia. So we're really excited to welcome him back to the 92nd Street Y. We will leave 15 minutes at the end of our program for questions, which will be collected through the chat. So I'm so glad and grateful that we got that situated so you can communicate with us via the chat. Just feel free to be asking questions along the way. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Lauren onto the virtual stage with me now. Hello, Lauren.
I'm just laughing at the chat. My mom's like, hi, I'm Lauren's mom.
Well, I'm so glad that she was able to chat with us. You just have to have a little resilience with these webinars. So appreciate everyone's patience. So I'm pleased to introduce Lauren Chaitoff, the founder and chief visionary of Yogi Beans, a yoga and wellness company for children. Lauren is a registered yoga instructor and member of the Yoga Alliance. In 2007, Lauren designed a novel curriculum that plants the seeds for authenticity and authentic expression in children. With the help of her husband, Brian, they created a framework for well-being that is the basis for uniquely enriching wellness experiences for children through both content and activity. So Lauren, welcome and congratulations on the book, because today is actually the release date of the book. So we can all go out and grab it if we want to.
Yes, it is the book birthday. Thank you so much for having me, Katera.
Got my copy right here. It's fantastic. I'm excited to dive into it.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. I'm so happy, and I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, well, let's dive right in. So I want to kind of start with maybe giving you a little pushback, because I feel like you probably get this all the time. So let's set the stage, right? I feel like there are parents out there that say my child is too active. There's no way you're going to be able to get them in a room in yoga and have them focus on this. So, what do you say to the naysayers of yoga? What do you tell parents that come to you and are a little bit hesitant of thinking that their child may thrive in a yoga setting?
Yes, I've definitely heard that before. It's a common concern, I guess, parents have. And I think what makes Yogi Beans so special, and really I think anyone that's teaching kids yoga knows this or should know this, is kids yoga needs to be fun. It needs to be playful. I often say the energy of our class evokes the name Yogi Beans. It's a fun name. So our classes are really, touching on imagination, creativity. They're fun, they're playful. It's not, your child is not going to be holding Warrior 2 for 5 breaths and staying still. There are moments of stillness in the class. There's pockets of that. But the most important thing is children are children. They need to have fun, because if they have fun, they're going to want to come back to class.
Yes, I love that. So tell us a little bit about the title in the book and the reasoning, because I'm thinking there could be 50 poses, there could be 75, there could be 100, but no, there's 108, and that seems very intentional. So I'd love to learn more about that.
Yes, it definitely was. So when we were coming up with the title for the book, the publishers wanted to, they wanted a number. They said that often engages kids when they see 100 or 101. They're like, okay. And they threw out 100 and 101. And I thought to myself, well, if we're going to do a number, we should do 108. And the reason I chose 108 is what's called a Vedic number. So in, yoga culture or Ayurveda, this number shows up a lot. It's often referred to as nature's secret code. So a few ways you might see it in nature is the distance from the sun to the earth is 108 times the diameter of the sun. The distance from the moon to the earth is 108 times the diameter of the moon. And then in Ayurveda, right, Eastern medicine, there are 108 marma or pressure points in the body. It also, there's yoga, like a necklace, a mala. There's 108 beads on a mala. I don't know if it's connected or not, but there's also 108 stitches on a baseball. So that's just kind of, and there's a few more that are listed out in the book, but we do explain like why this random number. Also, in summer solstice in Times Square, they'll often do 108 sun salutations. So there's a correlation between 108 and yoga.
I love that that was so intentional and very interesting fact about the baseball. We'll have to look into that more.
Interesting.
Okay, so now let's really kind of get into the conversation into there's just so many things to delve into here. And I think this is all really good timing because children, I feel, really need what yoga brings to the table. So first, let's just talk about movement. We know that levels of being sedentary in children continue to rise. There's TV time, tablet time, video games. Just sitting down and studying. There's all the excuses in the world to be seated. So what is your philosophy and your thoughts on parents and teachers advocating for children to get moving? How can we be cheerleaders on an everyday basis for children to get moving?
Yes, that's a great question, an important one, because we really are living in more of a sedentary lifestyle now. And I think a lot of that has to do with screens. When we were children, right, we would watch TV, but the TV was in one place. Now children can take their screen, either their tablet, their iPad, their iPhone, and just bring it with them, and they're sitting and they're not moving. And we offer our classes at the 92nd Street Y, and I know you've always been a huge advocate of children's wellness and children's movement, which is great. And I think the mind and body are so closely connected. And children today, really, especially after the pandemic, they're growing up in a pretty bad mental health crisis. I think adults are feeling it too. We're all coming off that kind of post-traumatic stress of what we all went through together. And movement makes you feel good. When we're even just like, if we sit like this, there's a difference when we sit up nice and tall energetically. So getting our bodies moving is just so important for our mental, not just our physical well-being, but our mental and emotional well-being. So I think, it's great. Schools are becoming bigger advocates of getting children moving. We've gotten so much busier because I think so many schools are now really aware of the importance of this.
Yes, we are starting to see these little steps and progress, but I certainly think the work you're doing with Yogi Beans, I think that helps, weaving that into after school activities. I also love that yoga is a skill set and an activity that children can do that's non-competitive. We actually didn't talk about this in prep, but it really just kind of came to me that it's not about comparison and not about who's going to do this faster or, better technique. Do you have any other thoughts on that or benefits?
Yes, so that's huge. One of the kind of affirmations we always repeat in our classes, and it's actually in the book, in the front of the book, kind of in the introduction, is we always say, it's a yoga practice, not a perfect, right? We don't call it a yoga perfect, we call it a yoga practice. And I think the non-competitive aspect is so important for children. Children today they're under a lot of stress. And I know for me as a child, I was never actually into sports, and I didn't, and I was like the child in like left field, like making a dandelion crown. I remember, my dad like sponsored the baseball team. He was like, oh my God, I just was never into competitive sports, and I didn't really have an outlet. I didn't have a place where I could be physical, where it wasn't a competition. So I think that's really important for a child like myself. It's also important for the competitive child to have a place where they don't have to feel the pressure to win. The other thing about yoga that I think is so great for children is a lot of children's activities like gymnastics or dance, once a child's body starts changing, they often, they can't keep up with that activity the way they did maybe when they were 7 years old. And yoga is for everybody. It is a lifelong activity. So the child can start at 3 and they could practice until they're 93. It's for everyone, so yes.
Yeah, and I would imagine it complements so many different sports as well. You mentioned gymnastics, dance, all sports that have to do with flexibility, even, power sports that you think of like football. Those athletes can absolutely benefit from more mobility. So Yes, I think that's a really good point about,
Yeah, we've gotten children, like parents that have called us and been like, my child is a competitive swimmer, or we've had like a competitive tennis player, and they're like, they really need to stretch. They need to learn how to relax. So absolutely, it complements that competition.
yeah. So earlier you mentioned the mind-body connection, and I think most of us, adults, we have an idea of what that concept is, but how do you even begin, introducing that concept to children in a yoga class? And how is that something that they can carry with them throughout their day?
Yeah, that's it's such an important part of working for me, I believe, of children's yoga. We kind of break up our program into these 4 pillars. So mind light, heart light, yoga body, and yogic way. And the heart light is kind of social emotional learning. The mind light is focus and concentration. The yoga body is like the physical yoga body. And the yogic way is how, we relate to society around us. So when we're talking about the mind body connection, it's often the feelings, right? That might be the heart light, but where do those feelings show up in our body? So when a child will say, often children, when they're feeling nervous or anxious, my belly hurts. Right? I have a bellyache, or my head hurts, things that we can't see. Because if a child says like, I have a scratch, you could, oh, show me. Right? And you're like, you don't have a scratch. Right? But if they say my belly hurts, you say, okay, what, how are you feeling right now? What's the feeling in your belly? What does it feel like? My daughter, actually, my youngest, she has, I think it's the best name that she came up with. When she is feeling anxious, she calls it a tummy bubble. It feels like her tummy is like bubbling. And I love that because it's so good, because that's what it feels like for a child. And, well, when your tummy hurts, it's like a tummy bubble. What are you nervous about? And getting to the root of like, why does your tummy hurt? What are you feeling? And sometimes talking to kids, we'll use sometimes, I think it's like idioms, right? Like, what is the frog in your throat? What are the butterflies in your tummy? What does it mean when the cat got your tongue? What are those feelings that are associated with that? So I think that's really helpful for kids, talking about when you say your belly hurts, does your belly hurt at night? Is that when your belly starts to hurt before bedtime? Because that's often like with kids, right? Nighttime brings up a lot of emotions and feelings. So that's how we'll explain it to kids in a way that they can understand and they could relate to. Oh yeah, my belly does always hurt at night. Why do you think? Do you like night? Does nighttime scare you a little bit? Or yeah, I don't like the dark. I get nervous. I want my mommy. I want to stay in her bed. My belly doesn't hurt when I'm in her bed. So now we can relate the feeling to what's going on in the body.
Got it. So they're starting to connect what they're feeling in their body with their emotions, and probably being a little more present in the moment, I would imagine, and kind of understanding this is the why to me feeling this way, which maybe provides a more sense of control a little bit, and comfort if they understand it. What about anger? Is that something that,
yeah, that's a good one.
yeah, do you have any techniques, mind body wise, that
I
support
do.
anger?
There's one in the book. So another affirmation that we'll use in our classes, and we do yoga as a practice, not a perfect all the time. And we often say, how you breathe can change how you feel. So we're really big on teaching children that all the feelings are human feelings. There are no bad feelings. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to cry, right? All of those feelings are normal. And the feelings, what's really important for children is the feeling's going to pass, right? These feelings are not permanent. All these feelings are impermanent, kind of like the weather. We'll relate it to the weather. So for anger, if you have the book, the lion's breath, I'll look silly and do one now, but like we scratch our paws, we stick out our chests, we take a big breath, and we let them release, right? Because even if you think of the word, and I'm sure you've probably heard this, but like disease, right? It's dis-ease. And if you hold all of those feelings inside of you, that's what starts to happen. So teaching kids that all of these feelings are okay. And sometimes you have to let the feeling out. So we'll do a lion's breath related to anger. We also have a wood chopper. This is also in the book, like a wood chopper activity. And that's kind of, we inhale, we reach our arms up, and then we take a big exhale and we say, oh, and we do like a bunch of wood chopping breaths. And it's just that release. It feels good. It really honestly feels good as an adult too, just to let that anger go, not to suppress it. And then we also, Books are great too. There's a lot of books that deal with anger that we'll read, like Grumpy Monkey and stuff like that, or Moody Cow. But I think the key is really teaching kids that all the feelings are okay. It's how we react to the feeling. We're all going to get angry. It's normal. We're all going to feel sad. It's not going to stay that way. It's what we do with that feeling.
Yes. And I love that it's not burying the emotion down or having judgment with it. It's kind of like a nice flow of let's feel the emotion, let's let it go, let's not turn our backs to it, which I'd imagine is really important for children to, to learn how to process and move forward through those emotions.
100%. It's the self-regulation, especially with, for all children, but even like the young ones. We work with a lot of preschoolers, right? Like a pre-K student, like learning how to self-regulate their emotions and how, to recognize the feeling, to be able to maybe even label it, right? That's hard for kids. And then what can you do with it? You could take a lion's breath. You could take some stomps. You can do some wood chopping breaths. And that's I often tell the kids with anger, it's not going to it may not make the anger go away, but it's going to make the anger get a little bit smaller, right? We can become friends with the feeling, those big, scary feelings. And then it might just get a little bit smaller, and then ultimately it'll dissipate.
And I think what I'm hearing here for all the parents out there or the teachers, I have a 3-year-old myself. I'm like, is this the key to the temper tantrum? Is this the key that will kind of calm things down?
It's definitely an element, right? Sometimes those tantrums, you just have to like let go and like let it run its course. And I agree with you. I think it's allowing them to not saying no, stop, let the feeling come out. Sometimes when that's happening for me with my girls, and they're a little bit older, but we still have the occasional meltdown, right? It's just being present. Like I remind myself, I've heard, I love Dr. Becky, and she says, my presence is enough. Right. And I think about that, I breathe, and I allow the feeling to pass.
Yes. Well, this ties in really nicely to talking about mental health with children, which we know, you mentioned it before, coming out of COVID. There's just a lot happening in the world right now in children's lives. There is, competition with school. What school am I going to get into? There are tests coming up. There's a lot of standards. And so I'm wondering if you have any examples through your work with Yogi Beans of seeing positive effects or any kind of effect, maybe something that surprised you on children and their mental health in general.
Yes, that's a really good question. I've been doing this now since 2007. So it's pretty cool as I have some students, like my first students, she actually messaged me today. I started working with her and she was 7, and I think she's 23 now. And she had a really hard, I remember she told me her application process getting into college was really difficult for her. And she said, what we learned in yoga helped her so much, just the breath, the being open, right? To being open to the unknown, right? She said, the work that we did in yoga helped her so much during that really hard time. I also had another student. I'd say he's either a senior in high school now or maybe a freshman in college. And I reconnected with him and he said, I still have my Yogi Beans mat in my room and I still practice some of the breathing and the meditation you do when I'm feeling stressed. So I think I often say it's like if a child takes 1 or 2 things away from the practice, like that is a lifelong skill for them that they can use when they're an adult. I have done my job. Another example I love, I remember a parent once emailed me and she said, she emailed the school and the school passed it along to me. And they said, I don't know, you have this yoga person come in on Fridays. And I just have to tell you what happened. My daughter, she's usually very calm, but I asked her to go in the shower and she had some massive eruption. And she said, Mommy, I need to go in my room and do my peaceful hands, which is an activity that we do. She goes, and mom was like, I don't know, what is she, peaceful hands? What is she talking about? And then she said, and all of a sudden she came out of the room and she was like, okay, I'm ready to go in the shower. So children they grab on just like anything to what resonates with them. And then they use it in their life, which is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great example. I love that. And the fact that it wasn't prompted, it was the child themselves saying, I am going to do this. This is now a comfort zone for me. That's why we've talked about this. I'm very passionate about getting children moving young so that later in life, whether they fall away from exercise or not, it's always kind of there, even if it's just going for a walk. It's that love of movement is always kind of there. So I think that's such a powerful example of how, just starting to incorporate yoga into either everyday life or classroom setting, it becomes something that you can kind of lean back on in a time of stress, or, teenage years being, I wish I had known more yoga going through my
Oh, me
teenage
too.
years.
Me too. I know. Another one I thought of too. I love this one. A dad once told us, I don't know if you've ever had to put eye drops in your daughter's eye. It's not always very fun for a parent.
Very
And he
difficult.
said, the eye drops, it was such a battle every night. And then one day she just goes, Daddy, I need to do my yoga breath. And he was like, oh, okay. And she's like, she took a breath, and then like she let me put the eye drop in, and I couldn't believe it. So they take things from what they learn in school or after school at the 92Y or wherever they're doing the practice, and they do incorporate it into their life.
Yes. Well, you touched upon this a little bit. You had mentioned the schools earlier. So let's talk a little bit about, is there progress in seeing any form of mindfulness or yoga happening in the classroom? And I know you work with New York City schools and other school systems. And just curious to learn more about your thoughts on incorporating yoga into a classroom setting. What are the benefits to the children or to the teachers too?
Yes, well, it's a great question. I remember when COVID first happened, and we were in schools and studios, so like everything shut down, and I was like, oh my God, I lost all my business. Like everything is closed, And I remember my dad saying, Lauren, it's going to come back stronger than ever because people are going to realize like the mental health factor, and it's true. So many schools, even daycare centers, preschools, are so much more cognizant of like children's mental health is a real thing. We sometimes look at kids, it's like, oh, they're just kids. Yes. And they also feel stress. They also pick up on the stress of their parents and the adults around them. So I think now there are so many more schools and centers that are incorporating this work either into their school day, having us come in and do residencies, like you said, we're a DOE, New York City DOE vendor. We work with a lot of even like corporate clients, we work with hospitality. We do classes at American Girl. Barbie has like a mindfulness Barbie. People are just starting to realize, oh, this is real. And why would we not want to give these tools to children? And in terms of the teachers, it's funny you mentioned that. I just got invited to lead a course for a big nonprofit about helping educators and teachers take care of themselves, because teachers have gone just above and beyond. I mean, they always do, but especially these past few years, they're putting so much into their students that they're neglecting their own self-care. So we'll talk, we'll do PDs where we're teaching the teachers how to take care of themselves, and then ways that they can implement that in the classroom for the kids. We were actually speaking, and I don't know if the people watching know, but Mayor Adams, that the initiative, he created an initiative where all New York City schools are going to have 3 to 5 minutes of mindful breathing in the classroom, which is just, coming from the top. That's so great. He's a yogi and aware of all this. I think he said they call him like the lettuce mayor or something like that, or the broccoli mayor, because he's trying to institute all of these like healthy habits for kids, which I just think is so great.
Yes. And I love that for the teachers too, because I think, the work you're doing in teaching teachers how to incorporate that, into their lives, whether it's for self-care or the classroom, to be able to rely on those tools to get everyone's attention. I think about the like ringing the bell or clapping the hands, or kind of these sort of sharper ways to get everybody to tune in. But then, I've also seen techniques used where all of a sudden the teacher gets very quiet and very mindful. And then little by little, the students start to pick up on that. And, within a minute or two, it's just completely quiet and everybody's settled in. But I don't think the children know how to do that if they haven't been taught. And so kind of leading the way with the teachers is really important.
100%. Absolutely.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I go in the right direction here because there's so many different ways we could go. So I want to get into how we can incorporate as parents or grandparents or caregivers, how do we incorporate yoga as a practice into our daily routine? Going back to the beginning, I'd imagine there's a lot of parents who say, there's no way I have time. There, I had a busy day at work. I have to cook dinner, do bath time. There's so many things that have to happen. So how do you recommend that people start, and what are kind of the tools?
Small. Are so small. I don't do 45 minutes of yoga with my kids every day. Are you kidding? Like who is, no one is, there's just, life gets busy. So I always say, start really small because consistency is more important than like the quantity, right? The length of time that you're doing it. So it might be, it could be anything like, okay, before we go to school, like we're going to take like a centering breath. You're going to put you're going to put your hand on my heart. I'm going to put my hand on your heart. We're going to take a breath. We're going to feel our feet connected to the floor. And we're going to say something that we're thankful for or something we're excited about today. Or maybe it's, if your child has anxiety before going to bed. That was me. I hated to go to sleep, so much anxiety around bedtime, right? Maybe then it's like, okay, we're going to come into a child's pose, kind of a relaxing, restorative pose, and we're going to take 3 breaths together. It could be so simple. Or if you're trying to get your child to maybe focus a little more, right? Focus and concentrate. Maybe it's while they're brushing their teeth, they're standing on one leg, something like that. Oh, while you brush your teeth, can you keep your eyes focused on the toothpaste and try and stand on one leg? And maybe that becomes like a nightly practice that you do. I also think it's modeling. Children, they don't always listen to what we say. They listen to what we do. So if they see you sitting quietly, taking 3 deep breaths, or like, I was talking with another yoga instructor yesterday who leads family classes. And we were saying, our kids see us practicing. They might, my daughter climbs under me in down dog or does, she's not really practicing along with me, but when she sees me lie down in Shavasana, that's the final resting pose, she'll come lie with me and start breathing with me without me having to even prompt her. So I think it's the modeling that's really important too. And if you want to actively like engage your kid in the practice, don't get overwhelmed by thinking you have to do some 20-minute class. Just start really, really small.
Yes. And it's funny because before we had this conversation, I practice yoga, and my 3-year-old, watches me, and like you, sometimes is crawling on me, and it's fine. But then there have been times that I've looked over and she says, Mama, look at my downward dog, or look at my tree pose. And I'm amazed at how much she picks it up. And I'm like, I don't even know if I used that terminology with her. It might have been the instructor that I was watching, or, the kids are just like sponges. So I think you're right. Just the modeling without forcing it. They did, we practiced something actually in our nursery school at the 92nd Street Y many years ago when we were experimenting with some curriculum, and we wanted to look at physical education and how we could elicit some curiosity from the children without necessarily forcing jumping jacks and running and push-ups. So what we experimented with was taking an athletics coach and putting them in the playground setting and having them just on their own start to do these movements. And little by little, you would see kids, and they didn't necessarily stay with the coach the entire 45 minutes they were outside, but they were curious, and they would come over and they would say, oh yeah, I want to do those squats with you for a few minutes, or I want to run with my knees up. And, it was just such a positive interaction. So I look at it very similar to that just by doing it.
I love that. I love that. And it's, whether you're a child or an adult, no one really ever wants to be told what to do, right? And when it comes like more organically, and a child is like, oh, what are they doing? And they're curious, right? Then it happens more naturally, and they're more likely to stay engaged because they want to be there. They're not being told you have to do this. They're curious. They want to. And I think that relates a lot. Yoga, I always say, I tell people in a children's yoga class, I try to create the vibration of yoga. Yoga is open. Yoga is expansive. It's not sit on your mat and stop and do this now. That's not yoga. That's antithetical to yoga. So exactly what you said. I think that's a very yogic way of doing it, actually.
Yes. So you mentioned consistency. Is there any minimum amount of time or minimum amount of days? Do you have?
I mean, I really don't think there's a minimum. I think it's consistency. Like, especially, I often say the younger your child, like the less time, right? The shorter their attention span. You have a 3-year-old, like she's not supposed to do something for like 30 minutes, that's hard for them. So
Yeah.
I would say, if anything, maybe the younger your child, the shorter the amount of time. If you have a 10-year-old, maybe it's not breathing for 30 seconds, but maybe it's like holding the space for a minute or a minute and a half or something like that. But every child is different too. Every child has different abilities. So I wouldn't put like a hard minimum on it. I would say just be consistent.
I love how accessible that is. Like,
Right?
everybody can do this. We can take 60 to 90 seconds out of our day to do this. It's doable. So I've had the pleasure of seeing your classes in action since Yogi Beans is at 92nd Street Y, which has been such a pleasure. And I think what always struck me was the playfulness component, the props that are brought into it.
So many props.
So many props, which makes sense, but at the same time, some people might say play and yoga, does that really go together? So tell us a little bit more about the importance of play. And I'd imagine maybe sometimes there's a tightrope that you have to walk of, okay, now we've crossed the line into now we're not focusing the way that we should be. How do you navigate that in a classroom?
Yes. So there's I have two answers to that question. So I think play is, there's a Sanskrit word. So Sanskrit is the ancient language from India. Oftentimes, if you know namaste, those are Sanskrit words. And there's a Sanskrit word lila, and it means divine play. So play is part of life, and I think even as adults, sometimes we get so serious about our practice, right? We're so focused, and like you'll even hear a teacher be like, unclench your jaw, smile a little bit more. We want to have a levity. In the Yoga Sutras, they say stira sukha, right? A steadiness and an ease. So I think play organically should be a part of all, everyone's practice. And yes, you're right, with children, we don't want it to get out of control, because we're really not looking to water down the yoga. And even while we're making, cat and cow sounds and whatnot, we want to teach them these important life skills and tools. So one thing that when I, train our instructors, I talk a lot about contrast. We want children to learn how to sit still. We want children to be quiet, and we have to honor that children are children. And it's not going to come naturally for a child to just sit quietly and not move. They shouldn't, right? So it's this little give and take all the time. If we want the child to be still, let them move, let them be really loud, let them make these big movements, let them use their voice, and then contrast that with the silence and the stillness. And I feel that really works so nicely with kids. So like when we're warming up our body, we might be doing some jumps and some silly moves and wiggles, and then we'll say like mountain pose, take a big breath. And then we'll go back to moving and playing and jumping, and then contrast that with the silence and the stillness. And I think that is really key. Yeah. Often I've had like parents too, they'll be like, well, that doesn't sound like yoga's going on in there. And I'm like, your child's 4. Like there's going to be moments where it doesn't sound like yoga. And then there are going to be these sweet pockets where they're lying there and their hands are on their belly and they're connecting to their breath. And then they're, making cow sounds with their friends. It's a give and a take.
Yes. And I feel like just that example you gave of mountain pose and the pausing with the breath, that must be so memorable to a child, that they can have that contrast and they can pause if they need to, just like we were talking about earlier with emotions and not letting your emotions get the best of you. Oh, wait, I have control to pause here. So I love that with the contrast of the play and the stillness. That's
even in our trainings. When I'm training instructors, I'm like, the key is contrast. Like and children sometimes we notice it more, right? Like we notice the sun on a really rainy day. Oh, the sun came out, So with that contrast, that silence and stillness becomes more emphasized, right? They're aware of it. Oh, wow, it's so quiet now. How does that feel in your body?
And I would imagine that also gets children to want to continue to participate, because I know with athletics, we are also very careful and kind of conscious to put games, whether it's at the end of the session or because we don't want to deter a child from coming to practice. We want you to come in and feel like excited to do that physical activity. So I think the play component is huge, and just getting children excited to walk back in.
And I always say that the class, going back to that first question, the class needs to be fun. And I think that's why we've had success the past, 16 years, is because we are teaching these yogic concepts. We're not shying away from that. And like our classes there's games, there's music. I look for instructors like, when I'm interviewing one of my, will you moo like a cow and bark like a dog? Are you comfortable doing that? Like, that's such an odd interview question. And I need people that are going to be expressive and engage the children. It's really important.
Yes. Well, I guess I'll contrast that question with a question about sleep. Sleep is a really hot topic right now for adults, but just like you said, for children too. Lots of children are staying up way too late. They're restless at night, or they're scrolling or studying something. So what have you seen in your practice and the work that you do? What are some of the benefits of yoga on sleep? Is it correlated at all?
I agree with you. I feel like sleep is one of those underrated things that like people, like there should be more focus on like how important sleep is for our overall health, especially children. So I wholeheartedly agree with you there. In terms of yoga, I think the winding down process with the breath can help children fall asleep, especially if a lot of children have issues around sleep. Like I said, that was a big thing for me. And I sometimes I'll ask children in class who has a hard time falling asleep at night. I mean, more than half probably raise their hands. So one thing I'll tell them to do is they could take a stuffed animal, they could put it on their belly, and they could take a big breath and try and rock their stuffed animal, 5 times, just to get them connected to their breath. Because when we take those deep breaths, it stimulates, right, our nervous system and tells our body to calm down. Another thing I found very helpful, Yogi Beans has some guided meditations it's an app called Insight Timer. It's totally free. And there's there's all these children's meditations. And I know my oldest daughter, when she goes to sleep, she likes to listen to a story, to a meditation. And it starts off, ours start off, and many of the other ones, taking some deep breaths, getting yourself comfortable, making sure you're situated and cozy in your bed. And then it just goes into a nice story with some sort of, positive moral. And that has been at least for my children, very helpful. And I get like the reviews from ours that like parents love these meditations. We have one about a fairy named Juju Bell, and kids really like that. So I think in terms of sleep, connecting to the breath, and then the guided meditations I have found very helpful with my own children and other children. We do also do baby yoga, and that's interesting. I just thought of this. That's like where the grown-up is moving the baby in these little stretches. And I do find I've had a lot of parents tell me after that baby yoga class, their baby sleeps so well. So that's, but I'm like, that's the best, right? But yeah, I guess because their body's so stimulated. They're like, they took like the longest nap ever after baby yoga. That's just kind of a random thing.
And that'll keep the parents coming back.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get my breather after baby and parent
2-hour nap.
Yes. Well, and I think going back to the breath work and the sleep, it just goes back to why it's important to start incorporating that breath work and that yoga work in, so that it is a comfort zone for the child, because they're not going to know to rely on that if they've never experienced this before. So I think I'm just such an advocate for what you're doing with Yogi Beans, because bringing in that play component to it, it's going to tie it a positive experience to that breath work. So it really does become a comfort zone for them. So we do have a question that came in that was just kind of asking if you could elaborate a little more on the home practice. So I still have a few more questions, but I thought we could take a moment to dive into that, because I bet there's a few people just looking for more tips on, and if you can go a little bit deeper into the home practice.
I think for a home practice, the first thing to think about is like, what's a good time for you and your child, right? When is that sweet spot of time? Does your child get up really early in the morning and maybe that's a time to do it? Or is it before bed? Or are you home with your child throughout the day and they're, 3 years old and maybe it's before, around noon after lunch? I would first figure out a time that works. And then, starting a home practice, you can do something make it like a ritual. That's really important, that there's like consistency and a ritual. So maybe it's like you have a little bell that you ring when it's yoga time, or you find a spot in your house, right? Like your peace corner or something like that, that's where you're going to go to practice. The practice itself does not have to be very long. And I would encourage you to start with like 5 to 10 minutes and do it consistently, and then maybe build up time. And perhaps, you find your little peace corner. You choose the time of the day that's going to work best for you. And we all know our child, like probably from 4 to 7, maybe not the best time, that witching hour, but you find a time that works for you. And perhaps you just start with like ringing a bell or a chime, doing some sort of breathing exercise. And then maybe like in the book, everything is broken up in themes, right? So the book would be great. You're like, okay, what theme are we going to do today? Do you want to go to the farm? Do you want to go to the jungle? Do you want to go to outer space? Do you want to go to bird world? All these, we have so many different themes. And then you choose that. And then you do maybe 2 or 3 poses together. And then I would say definitely have some sort of shavasana or rest after that. And if it's you and your child, maybe you're rubbing their feet. My kids love that. They love a good little foot rub. Maybe you're gently pressing on their shoulders. Maybe you're taking their favorite lovey or stuffed animal and putting it on their belly and seeing if they could take 3 breaths, or you're playing their favorite song and you're lying there together. I think that would be a really good way to start the home practice. Keep it short and keep it ritualistic so the child knows what to expect. And then you can use the book to be like, oh, have fun with it. The other thing that's great about the book, it tells you in the front, like how to use it, but we had these little clues. So like here, I'll just like read one of them aloud, but like if I'm in, I am an amphibian. I live on the land and water, and I start my life as a tadpole. Do you know what that is? And then you could do like the frog pose together, so that might be for like a 5-year-old or something like that, knowing what the tadpole is. But that's a fun way, like making it like a guessing game too. Like, can you guess this animal? And then you do the pose together.
Wow, sounds like such a nice nurturing bonding time.
Yes, doing yoga with your child is, and we've led family yoga classes at the 92Y, and the parents are always, they love it. It is, especially if you're a yogi yourself, being able to introduce the practice to your child is very special.
Well, since you just picked up the book there, I'm also curious, what was the inspiration? Because you do in-person classes, what was the inspiration behind putting the poses into book form?
It's funny you asked that, because everything like kind of, how life happens when you're busy making other plans. So the day, when did the city lock down? I think it was like March 20th or something. I don't know, something. Yeah. The day before the lockdown, I went, and a friend of mine from Northwestern, that's where I went to college, he's a great photographer. And I said, you know what, I need new photos for my training manuals, because we do trainings where we teach people how to teach yoga to kids. And I went to his studio and I shot all these pictures, and I was just going to use them in our training manual. Then COVID happened the next day, lockdown. All our trainings were canceled. We had a training scheduled in Dubai. I mean, everything canceled. So I was like, I have all these pictures. What am I going to do? What do I do with them? So everything went online, and we created these like pose cards, and we started using them in our online trainings because it's really helpful. I could demonstrate the pose, but oftentimes people that are learning to teach kids yoga, I forgot the pose. I need to see a picture of it again. So we use them in our online trainings where they would get like with their manual, they'd get like 20 pose cards or something like that. And then I was like, this is a great idea for a book. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to do like a ebook, because I'm like, I don't know how to, a book was so daunting to me. So I was like, I'm going to create this ebook. I'm going to give them like all 100 and, I think I had more, maybe even more, like 120 poses or something, but because this is 108, we only use 108. And I was so excited. And to be honest, like, it didn't do so great. Like everyone was like, oh, is this a hard copy? And I was like, no, it's an ebook, and everyone was like, oh, this would be so great as a hard copy. And I was like, oh, okay. And I kind of was like, I don't even know where to begin. And I called a different friend from college. He's in publishing. And I was like, what do I do? I'm like, I can't self-publish this because it's too many photos. And it would just be too, like, there's just no way. I'm like, he's like, you need to get an agent and you need to get a publisher. And I was like, how do I do that? And he was like, I do know someone. I'm going to introduce you to someone. And luckily, like the stars just aligned. And she, my agent, Liz Nealon from Great Dog Literary, she used to work at Sesame Street Workshop. So she was in like the children's world, and she got it. She was like, I see what you're trying to do. I love this. And then our publisher, Page Street Kids, they do a lot of like instructional books for kids cookbooks, kids science books, all these things. And it was a really good match. So that's how it happened. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to take these photos and make a book. It was like, I'm going to take these photos from my training manual. And then the world turned upside down and I had all these beautiful photos and figured out how to use them. So it's kind of a fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and again, congratulations on it. I think one of the things that I also realized I really appreciate about it is that you don't have to go to the phone. Like you mentioned with the ebook, there's something about when you're in the middle of practicing yoga or you're in the mood for that like nurturing bonding time with your child that you can, pull out a book instead of a device and go through that movement with them. So I think that's really powerful. All right, so I am just checking to see if there are any other questions coming in. Everyone, please feel free to jot down any questions that you have in the chat. I can certainly keep going. I have plenty of questions for you. So I want to do a little rapid fire. Number one favorite pose for a parent and child to participate in together?
I would say like a centering breath, just like I put your hand on my heart. Oh, I always ask, right? Can I put my hand on your heart? Making that eye contact and taking those breaths together. I think that's really good too when your child is in an escalated state to breathe with them. Sometimes you have to be the one to breathe first, and then they'll follow along. So that's what about the favorite pose for a child to calm down? Maybe it's the same one, but maybe you have another, physical one. Sometimes, the physicality for the children does. I always say that's like the portal to get them engaged in yoga. So I would say to calm down is probably a child's pose. Because if any of the listeners, if you practice, that's it's an internal pose. It is a calming pose. There's something about just having your forehead connected to the floor. It's very calming. So I would say we call it mouse or child's pose. And then you could like rub their back while they're in child's pose and ask them like, this pose, it's going to help you feel, do you feel like your anger getting a little smaller? Can I feel you take a deep breath? Or can I put your lovey or stuffed animal on your back? Can you give them a little ride and make it go up and down? So you can do that too.
Good. And then number one tip for parents or teachers that say they just don't have enough time. I know we already talked about the minimum time amount, but
I would say, we all breathe. We're all breathing all the time. We're all standing on our feet a lot. So if you can just connect your feet to the earth for a moment, be aware and conscious of your breath, like you're tapping into yoga. You're doing that already. It's just a consciousness. It's just being present and aware. We're already doing a lot of things, so just bringing an awareness to your breath, an awareness to your posture. Like if you really have no time, like you can do that because you're already doing it. It's just the awareness.
Right. No, and I think you set it up in a very accessible way. A few, 2 minutes per day, we can make that happen.
I think, yes, if you want to, we can make anything happen, right? You just have to have the desire to want to do it. Yeah. But it is important. You're right. Especially as parents, there's so much going on. So really small steps.
Yeah, well, and for the parents in the audience, I would say, I think your example at the beginning was very powerful that you reached out to, or, this 23-year-old you used to work with when she was 7, reached out and said, hey, I'm still leaning on some of these techniques that I learned. I mean, geez, if we can give that to our children, to our teenagers, I just think that's such a powerful tool that, I personally wish I had known a little bit more about breath work in exam settings. There's certainly times I found myself kind of like, oh, I don't know if I can breathe. I'm not sure how to get through this math, this math problem. So I can imagine it's so beneficial within the school setting and application process. So I want to just ask about confidence a little bit. Have you seen any examples, or maybe, from research, how the yoga practice or this ability to kind of build resilience and understand our emotions, have you seen that support a child's confidence at all? Or maybe doing the practice of yoga helps their confidence in another area of their life?
Yes, I'm thinking of one specific child. This was a few years ago. However, I really saw it. We had a child that would come to our tween class, and he was overweight. And you could see like he was probably not playing maybe a ton of sports, and he was a little bit inhibited. And we do something called L stand, where you walk. It's actually quite hard. You walk your feet up the wall. It's like a prep for a handstand, and you look like an L, but your feet are on the wall and your hands are on the floor. And he got really good at it. And I could see, like, he always wanted to do L stand, just how good that made him feel. And my heart was just so happy for him that he found a place where he saw the strength. He was able to connect to the strength in his body, and he felt embodied, and he felt proud of himself. And that goes back to what you said at the beginning. Yoga is not a competition, right? This was a child who probably didn't want to play competitive sports with the fear that maybe he wouldn't win or would be laughed at or whatever. And yoga was a place for him where he was able to connect to his body, to feel his strength, for other people to be like, wow, that's really good. You're holding that for a while. So that's one example of where a child who may not feel confident in other physical activities, I think yoga is such a great outlet for them to help them build their confidence, and for them to recognize their body is strong, right? That their body can do things that they might not have, their mind might have told them they're not able to do, but their body is able to do it. So that's one example that comes to mind in terms of confidence. I think tying it back into the non-competitive is really.
Yeah. And I would say, I've seen examples within the athletics world that we do. And I consider the athletics and yoga, it's movement, whatever we're doing to get our children moving, it's all good. And we had a child several years ago that was very intimidated of going up to the chalkboard to write their name, or there was some sort of activity on the board. They were just a little stage fright, and they were part of a gymnastics program with us, and they conquered, I think, walking across the balance beam, which as a child can be really intimidating, to walk across this small 4-inch wide object that you could fall off of. And when they conquered that, the teachers told us the first thing the child did when they walked back into their nursery school room was they went up to the chalkboard and they wrote their name. So, and I'd imagine it's the same within yoga practice. It translates into different areas of their life.
100%, 100%. It's taking your yoga off the mat and into your life.
Yes, absolutely. So going back to yoga routine and weaving that into our routine, do you have any thoughts of following like a YouTube video online versus, opening the book and doing poses? Is there a right way and a wrong way to do this?
No right or wrong way. Obviously I'll be like, open the book. And going with what you said, I mean, there's some great online yoga, classes. I think it's what's going to work for your child. There is something nice about having the book and being present with your child, not them looking at a device. And sometimes, like, if you need to cook dinner and like, you're like, let me turn on a 15-minute like yoga, sure, why not? I think really any way that you can tap into the practice, I think is wonderful. There's no like, oh, don't use like YouTube. Of course, if it's going to work for your child and they're connecting with it, do what works.
Well, and I feel like if they were going to have the TV on for that 15 minutes that you're prepping dinner, it might as well be
let them do some yoga.
Exactly, that they can move with.
Sure.
Well, we're getting to the end here. I don't see too many other questions coming in, but I do want to ask about research, because we have this yoga, health, wellness, this research is evolving. I feel like things are coming out on a regular basis, usually showing the positive effects. So, with what you do, especially crafting curriculum, is there any research that you're excited to see come out in the next few years, or really hoping, hey, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about that. I would love to see if the mayor when he implements this mindful 3 to 5 minutes, I'd love there to be research behind that. I'd love to be involved in that. There's some research on children's yoga. There's research on, children rather than detention, like going to yoga. I believe there's like a research study on that, or just teaching them breath work. The difference, right, between that, I believe there's a study on that. But there's not a ton of research on it. And I think part of that is because, even just 16 years ago when I started this kids yoga, now it's becoming much more mainstream. It's becoming something that schools are doing. It's you'll watch Paw Patrol and see the characters on there doing yoga, or like a cartoon. It's becoming something that's more widely accepted and not like, oh, kids can't do yoga. Why not? Why can't we teach them these tools early on? So I would love to see, I follow Child Mind Institute. I know they do a lot of research on children's mental health, but specific to yoga, there's some research. I'd love there to be more though, yeah.
And I'd imagine some of those, maybe shorter longitudinal studies where they can kind of capture, a child who started learning when they were 3 years old and how that impacts them when they're in their teenage years, when they're going through testing, when they're going through the application process for college. It would be really interesting to see how they fare versus, children who were not exposed to yoga as a
I
practice.
don't think there are really any like real long-term studies like that. So it would be great. If anyone's watching this wants to start that,
Come see us.
Right? Come see us. So, and I think there will be sooner than later.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, it's been a pleasure connecting with you and talking about this. I feel like this was a great conversation with lots of good tips and practical tips. Certainly, if there's any other questions that come up after the fact, everybody's saying thank you, so no further questions coming in. But certainly feel free to email me and we can connect with Lauren. She's, her team's at the 92nd Street Y all of the time. I sent out the link to purchase the book in the email that went out to everybody. I'll send that again. So please support Lauren and Yogi Beans and this book, which is just wonderful. I'm excited to try out some poses with
try it out with your daughter.
Exactly. And maybe what I'll say is, I don't usually do this. Usually I do the outro, but Lauren, if there's anything you want to close with that you maybe would typically close a Yogi Beans class with, or, we can kind of end with maybe a little practical tip for the parents and teachers out there.
Well, I would say, why don't we all just take our one hand on our heart, one hand on our belly, right? And let's breathe into our belly. Breathe out. Breathe into our heart. Breathe it out. Send yourself some love. Say something kind to yourself. And then we'll bring our hands to our heart. And I thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Spark Your Health Talk. And we hope we'll see you for a future one soon. And congrats again on your publishing day.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for your continued support for you.
Yes. Stay well, everyone. Have a great evening.
Bye.